family story. Auggie was born with a rare medical condition, and we wanted to make sure our family and friends were there to support us, but also to understand what was going on. So we've been very open since he was born about our family. But ultimately, it was Auggie's decision whether to tell this story more publicly than we had already shared with our network on social media. And I'm pretty sure that his response was, heck yeah, but maybe with a different word to start off with. So here we are 2 months later in front of you to tell our very personal story of what's gone on in our family over the last couple years. Today I'm going to talk to you about the importance of community and acceptance in the face of things we might understand or might not understand. Andrew found this passage on the Union of Reformed Judaism website. I'm going to read this because I could not memorize it. We are guided by a central belief that all human beings are created B'Tselem Elohim, in the divine image. As it says in Genesis 1:27, and God created humans in God's own image. In the image of God, God created them. Rabbi Jonah Pressner, director of the Religious Action Center of Reformed Judaism, said in an interview with Fox News, as it says in Genesis, all humans were created in the image of God, and that means every person, every soul is a creature of God that looks like God, whether they are transgender or lesbian or gay. And so we welcome all of them. Each of us created in God's image has a unique talent with which we can contribute to the high moral purpose of Tikkun Olam, the repair of our world. Excluding anyone from our community lessens our chance of achieving this goal of a more perfect world. 24 years ago, Andrew and I met on JDate, which, if you're not familiar with it, is the Jewish online dating service. In 1999, you never really advertised that you met someone online. It was not really acceptable. It was not common. And it was probably a little embarrassing at that moment. We got married in 2002, and Temple Emanu-El's Rabbi Julie Schwartz performed our ceremony. Andrew will tell you that my contribution to our marriage and what has turned out to be a very important community for our family was a plethora of gay men who volunteered with me at AIDS Atlanta, where I was doing AIDS education work in the mid to late 90s. Some of these friends are watching online, and little did Andrew know that those friends would really become a huge part of our closest friendship circle, our family, if you will say, friends that are like family, and our support circle. My daughter was born in September of 2005. Andrew will say that she was the cutest baby ever. And that will be the last time I refer to her, my child, as a girl. My son is transgender masculine and uses the pronouns he, him, and they, them. And I tell you that because language is so important. For anybody in their mid-40s, 40s and 50s, I want you to think about it like this. When we were in high school and middle school, I'm fairly certain that you went to school with someone who was in the closet. They came out probably after college. I had 3 friends that were in that situation. What happened to my generation at that time growing up is really the evolution of what is going on with our youth and young adults today. So in the 80s, it was being kept in the closet, staying in the closet because you were gay. And in the 2020s, kids who have been in the closet are coming out with a gender fluidity that is new in our society. So we're first going to talk a little bit about language and acronyms. And we are because the language in our house has changed drastically over the last couple years. Edie alluded to assigned female at birth. That is my son. He was assigned female at birth, AFAB. Some people are AMAB, assigned male at birth. Gender fluidity. Being gender fluid means that you don't have a set gender or a set place on the gender spectrum. The term acknowledges that there is a spectrum and that gender is not binary. It is not black or white. And I'm going to pause here for a minute to add a little bit more about gender fluidity because it's really important in understanding the transgender community. Transgender simply means having a sense of personal identity or gender that doesn't correspond to the person's birth sex. So when we think of someone who's transgender, we might, in recent years, we would think of someone who had a clear gender identity post-transition. Caitlyn Jenner, worldwide athlete, went from male to female. Laverne Cox, an amazing actress, if you watched Orange is the New Black, also assigned male at birth, now a female. Or Elliot Page, maybe for some of the younger people who are watching, an actor who rose to fame as an actress starring in the movie Juno. So those are 3 examples of people who are transgender who have a clear gender identity as having gone from one gender to the other. But transgender encompasses a large umbrella, and people who are gender fluid and may not align with either gender are also transgender. So if you've heard the term non-binary, and people who use the term, the pronouns they and them, they also fall under the transgender umbrella. They may also present as gender neutral, and this is the challenge for us. We think of people as looking male or looking female, but come on. David Bowie wore dresses and makeup in the 70s, and Boy George wore dresses and makeup in the 80s. So why do we put these boundaries around what it is to be male or female? And so kids today, young adults today, non-binary just gives them a chance to express who they are and how they identify without putting those constraints around it. So they, them is an alternative for those who do not identify as male or female and provides language to represent the fluidity on the gender spectrum. Auggie uses he, him, and they, them. Sometimes he feels more masculine. Sometimes he might feel a little bit more fluid. They happen to be the word of the year in 2019 by Merriam-Webster. Merriam-Webster says, noting its singular rise in our society today. I'm not going to get into the semantics and the language, the grammar of it. We can save that for another day. But we can acknowledge that sometimes it doesn't sound right. But hopefully after today, it might to you. And think about it this way. You might have heard this. If you're going to see a new doctor and all you know is their name is Dr. Cohen, but you don't know whether Dr. Cohen is a male or female, you might say, oh, what specialty do they practice? We've been saying it in our language for years. Now you're just using it in a slightly different way. That's the end of my grammar lesson. So early life for us was pretty traditional. Auggie went to Temple Emanu-El to shift preschool, went to the JCC camps for several years. He attended Dunwoody Elementary and later went to Peachtree Middle School and went to Camp Thunderbird, as many of the Jewish kids in our community do, for summer camp. He loved swimming, music, dance, play dates with friends. He did it all. Auggie's currently a junior at DeKalb School of the Arts. He is an arts kid through and through. And he'll tell you a little bit more about some of his interests. In 6th grade, Andrew and I received a text from him on the way home from school. Mom, Dad, I am gay. All right, there it was. I was like, that's great. Awesome. Andrew, I think Andrew's reply was something like, okay, what homework do you have tonight? Like, that's how inconsequential it was for this announcement that came via text while he was on the way home on the bus. There were really never any barriers created in our house for our child to express who they were. In summer of 2020, if you can remember the COVID summer, our child told us at the dinner table, "I'm non-binary." We weren't quite exactly as, exuberant as, "That's great." But we both asked Auggie to tell us more, and they did. For the next few months, we practiced using they, them pronouns and battling our inner language syntax, the grammar, that this word is not being used correctly. Now it's like second nature, rolls off the tongue. A few months later, at the dinner table, Auggie told us that he was transgender masculine. Took a little pause there and said, all right, what does this mean? Tell us more. Since that time, we've had a crash course about identity and language that has emerged really in our society over the past 10 years. This is so new. It continues to be explored and understood. Our child is at the cutting edge of an opening in our society for people of every age to better express who they are. Even my nephews who are in their late 20s and early 30s, they weren't having this conversation 10 or 15 years ago. It's important to note that gender identity and sexual preference are distinct topics. This is something that comes up a lot, something when I'm posting on Facebook and sharing with my friends in my social circle that people ask me. They're not directly related to each other. And it's important to understand that. So I'll just repeat that. Gender identity and sexual preference are two distinct topics and not directly related to each other. Teens and young adults have a new language to discuss these topics and feelings. No longer does someone have to hide their true self like they did before. I would like to assert that God is challenging all of us to remember every person, every soul is a creature of God that looks like God. This new language and acceptance in the home does not make it any easier, however, for our child. It's very common for LGBTQ teenagers to have depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, and general unhappiness. Trans youth want to be treated just like everybody else. For many, this is a matter of life or death, not only in our community, but across the country. The laws are being passed and considered in many states that are endangering the lives of our transgender youth and adults. I'm just going to read a few statistics because they're so astonishing. It's so important to understand. According to a 2022 national survey by the Trevor Project, 50% of LGBTQ teens aged 13 to 17 seriously considered attempting suicide in the last year. 18% actually made a suicide attempt. 75% of LGBTQ teens experienced symptoms of anxiety in the last year, which is higher than the statistics that Rabbi Spike quoted in his Rosh Hashanah sermon last week among the general population. 61% experienced symptoms of depression. LGBTQ youth were 3.5 times as likely to attempt suicide as their heterosexual peers. And the suicide rate among trans teens was 5.87 times higher than the average among all teens. Homophobia, transphobia, and any other practice that creates discriminatory conversation among us against a small minority will cause needless pain and hurt for way too many. Let's think about the lessons that we might have learned during the Holocaust. How many people were just carrying out orders? How many German soldiers were just carrying out orders? How many of them said they were just doing their job? How many neighbors watched Jews being gathered on their street and taken away? How many Germans did something to help those Jews that were in harm's way? And think about those that actually put their own lives in danger to help Jews. We all know the story of Oskar Schindler and the hundreds, if not thousands, of people that he saved, helping them. We all want to believe that we're Oskar Schindler, don't we? We all want to believe that we are there to help those who are in need. And full disclosure, we're not perfect. Many years ago, Andrew and I knew someone who was trans, who had come out as trans. And at the time, we probably rolled our eyes a few times and were like, what's this? And what are they doing? And why are they doing it? And so we had to acknowledge to ourselves that even we, who describe ourselves as pretty liberal and understanding and accepting, had moments in the past where we were not quite so with people in the trans community. We're all perfect. We're all imperfect. None of us are perfect. We're human beings. But it's important to be understanding, accepting, and vocal to those that are not. Or when you hear someone who is not, I should say. So what are you thinking about this conversation today? Are you sitting there saying, this is ridiculous? A man is a man and a woman is a woman? Are you saying, I don't really care, they can do what they want? Are you saying, I'm going to tolerate this even though I disagree with it? Or are you saying, I don't really know anything about this, but I want to learn more? Or maybe you're saying, I need to embrace this change in our society and let these kids know that they're loved for who they really are. So what can you do to help? For us, the answer is community. The LGBTQ community has helped us navigate through information and support. We've relied on a variety of resources to help us support our child. Our synagogue has been an amazing support. All the rabbis have been here. Rabbi Rachel may be our favorite. Rabbi Rachel did Augie's bat mitzvah, and Rabbi Rachel worked with Auggie on his renaming, which was a very special moment for our family. Our friends have been an amazing support system. They ask questions when they need to, but they have been there every step of the way with us. So our community, in their support, has said, we embrace Auggie and he's loved. And that has made this journey a lot easier for us. So like any mother, I will tell you that my son is an amazing human being. He is right-brained and creative, artistic, unlike his parents. He has been drawn to theater production and media and film and writing. He's compassionate, kind, maybe sometimes a little clumsy. In this way, he is like his parents. He is fiercely passionate about finding his true self. It has not been easy. As a parent, you want nothing more than to protect your child. Augie's had a lot of ups and downs during his transition. He's come home from school upset when a teacher continued to dead name him, meaning calling him the wrong name, and misgendering him. He worked at a restaurant this summer and guests would use the wrong pronouns. Of course, they don't know him, but it's still upsetting when people don't see you how you see yourself. As a parent, it is hard to see your child in pain. I have shed my own tears. I've had my own anxiety when I know he's hurting. It can be challenging when your friends haven't been through the experience and don't understand. The support at the temple has been amazing. The rabbis and the staff have fully embraced Auggie as his true self, and we are so immensely grateful for that. But there's still a hole that needs to be filled by people who have walked in the same shoes. Auggie still has to answer questions from kids at religious school about being a boy. He does it with grace and patience. And he's also had to tread carefully, because how do you explain this to a first grader? So he has to balance that. I hope by sharing today, we continue to build this community for our son, for others who are out there. I hope you consider this a step in the right direction to show your support. Some of you might have a child, a niece, a grandchild, a nephew who has come out as transgender or non-binary already. I'm fairly certain that within this community, within this room, and the people that are live streaming, there is a child in your family or your community that has not come out, that is desperately trying to be seen as who they are. They may be young, but they may be an adult who's also going through this journey, having language to help them understand who they really are. I encourage you to ask questions, but most importantly, I ask you to fully accept them. Accept them as who they are and let them know that they are loved. So remember, we are guided by a central belief that all human beings are created B'Tselem Elohim, in the divine image. And God creates humans in God's own image. In the image of God, God created them. So now I will let you hear more from Auggie about his journey.
Hi, everyone. Good yontif. I would just like to put a quick disclaimer that my mind is running a million miles a second, and I just edited the beginning part like 20 minutes ago. So, new additions, always exciting. So, I always start my speeches, whether I'm doing at my bat mitzvah or my renaming, I always start by telling a story. And besides it being a great attention grabber, I believe that stories are all how we connect with each other. If you know me, or you know that I have been writing and I've been making up stories in my head and on paper since I was in elementary school and probably even younger. I've been in love with writing from the first moment I realized that there were people who actually could put the words that they were thinking of in their mind onto the page and into the books that I read, and I wanted to do that too. And since then, I've written anything and everything I could, from the very, very bad play scripts in second grade to too many failed novel drafts in middle school. I'll get there one day. I love storytelling because no matter what I'm telling or where or who I'm telling it to, it's always different and it always takes a different form. If you ask me a question today about something and you ask me the same thing tomorrow, my answer would probably change even in that small 24 hours between the question, because I have time to think about it. I have time to think of more things that have impacted my situation. And that's what I love about it. There's always something new to add to a story because they're always ongoing and they're ever changing. So the story I'm telling you today, I have told it many, many times before. But this one is a little different to my other stories because those ones I control, those worlds. And in this one, the world kind of controls me. And that's something I have learned to do, is to control my own world. But in the early transition process, it seems to have controlled me a little more. This is my real life, and as much as we want it to, we can't control life in all its unpredictable glory. And while that is a blessing and a curse, it's a great lesson I've learned throughout my transition. You can do everything in your power to get something the way you want it to go, but life will do what it does, and you just gotta go with it. This is one of the first times I've looked at my transition through a Jewish lens, which is really funny because it's always been such a big part of my transition, even from the very beginning. As my mother told you guys, we are blessed with a wonderful community that has been there for me every step of the way. Early on, I relied on those things I was taught in Sunday school, pulling back into the deepest parts of my soul to remember those. And one, my favorite one that has stuck with me is B'Tselem Elohim, which my mother talked about, made in the image of God. And of course, we all know that in the Torah, in the Bible, conventionally, God is referred to as he, and is referred to using traditionally masculine terms, which confused me a little bit when I was young, because I was taught that some of us were girls, some of us were boys, and God fit into that boy category. But I was also taught that God was this supreme being, this ever-changing human that looked on all of us, and I was a little confused. I was like, well, if God is just like all of us, and some of us are girls and some of us are boys, God can't be a girl or a boy, because then we would all be boys. And looking back on this now, I'm reminded of an assignment that Rabbi Rachel gave me when I was getting bat mitzvahed, which was to take some prayers or take my Torah portion and flip the pronouns around to use she, to use they, to use he, to pose God as more feminine or more neutral. And this was the first time I had realized that things didn't have to be so rigid and that we could go beyond the limits set for us in common society. And now, I'm sure it's no surprise to you that I see God as more neutral, as just a figure who guides over us all the time and does not have any limits of these traditional norms. And that knowledge has definitely helped me to ease the struggle later down the line. When I first started exploring my gender identity in early 2020, I was really confused. I didn't have any of the language to describe what I was feeling at the time. It was out there, but I didn't really have access to it. It was more of a process than one moment of realization. It was never oh, I'm a boy. It was, well, I don't really feel like a girl that much, but I don't really know if there's another option for me. For a year and a half, I was very isolated physically and mentally, and quarantine did something different for everyone, and for me, it gave me a lot of time to think. And I'm a very social person, and so when I am alone, I just think a lot. I think and I think and I think. So that was what I did. It was a struggle to try to name all of the new feelings that I was feeling, and I like labeling, putting them into a neat little box and storing them away for later. But with this, it was so pressing, and I couldn't do that. I spent all of my free time online trying to figure out what I was feeling, if it was normal. My search history was crowded with different words and different definitions, which I won't get into today. But I was trying desperately to get it over and done with. And obviously, it wasn't that easy. I have gone through many different identities over the course of a couple years trying to find the one that suited me best. Being trans wasn't something I knew existed until just a couple years ago, and not something I had really considered for myself until around last year, because it felt like this big, huge final decision. But I've learned that in reality, everyone has their own definition of being trans, and it's flexible, and it's always growing and changing. It's a big theme throughout transition. I'm sure you will find that. And I am at a point in my transition where I am fully accepting of myself and my identity. I am proud of who I stand for and what I stand for, but being trans is not easy, especially in the early questioning stages. I am lucky to have a wonderful community that has supported me from the day I was born. But some people are not so lucky. Some people are born into families with transphobic ideologies, with homophobic ideologies. And adding all of that onto the amount of doubt and strain that trans people go through internally and mentally can be exacerbated by this external hate that is coming at you. When you're saying, I'm a little different, but all of these people around me, think it's wrong or think it's weird. So I will give you some stats also. Trans people are 4 times more likely as cisgender people. Cisgender people means those who identify with their birth sex to experience a mental health condition like anxiety or depression. In a 2019 survey, the Trevor Project, which is a wonderful organization that has a suicide hotline and does incredible work for queer youth, they surveyed over 34,000 young queer adults from ages 13 to 24. And the stats from that survey are very startling and a big wake-up call. 54% of trans and non-binary youth have seriously considered suicide, and of that 54%, 29% have attempted suicide. That is over half of non-binary youth who have considered that they should kill themselves because they do not feel welcome or they do not feel right, and that is a big problem. I have had my own struggles with my mental health. I've been diagnosed with anxiety and depression. I've constantly doubted myself, asking myself if this is something I'm really sure about, if I'm just making it up. I'm sure all of you had heard in the news sometimes about detransitioners, people who transition and then change their mind and then detransition back to their original gender. It's a lot of people's favorite arguments to play. What if you end up changing your mind? What if you regret it when you're older? And this is a topic that intrigues me because it's really not true. In a survey done by Trans Equality, 62% of these detransitioners did so only temporarily and reported living their chosen gender full-time. And of those that did permanently detransition, only 5% reported realizing that the gender transition was not for them as their reason for transitioning, reporting that only 0.4% of all trans people surveyed. In reality, 98% of trans people are happy with their transition, and another one detransitioned not to their original gender, but rather into a more gender-fluid addition or androgynous addition, a definition, like my mom was telling you about. This rigid idea of transitioning into what society deems as the only 2 genders, male and female, hurts trans youth and adults and puts them in these boxes that we often can't break away from. And it often makes it harder for them to get the life-saving medical treatment they need because, as we know, trans healthcare is life-saving, just observed by those stats. Over 70% of trans people have been harassed or abused for just trying to live as their authentic self. And I'm sure it makes no sense to you guys, as it makes no sense to me. Wouldn't it be nice to just let people do what they want to do? Life is a series of trial and error, figuring out what works for us. When I started to dress more masculine, many people told me that I didn't look like a real boy, or I wasn't trying to really be a man. But that's so weird to me. Why do people feel entitled to an opinion on how I express myself? Transitioning is deeply personal, and with input coming from all directions, it is incredibly overwhelming. Gender dysphoria, which is the sense of your internal gender not aligning with your external appearance, is horrible. It's grueling. Self-loathing 24/7 is exhausting mentally and physically. When your outside body doesn't match your inside, it's a constant struggle. I like to say that the majority of transitioning is done in silence. Going about your day when you're questioning everything and still having to act like everything is okay is pretty rough. It takes a long time to be able to put a label on what you're feeling and be able to accept that. And not everyone likes labels, and that's okay too, because once you find what's right for you, what your truth is, it's incredibly freeing. It took a long time, but I think I'm starting to find my own truth. Ask anyone to describe me, and they'll probably say outspoken and loud. I'm very loud. Through Temple Emanu-El, I have become the best version of myself I could possibly be. I worked with Rabbi Rachel to design our Hebrew renaming ceremony and to change my name to Aderet Zachar. I helped organize a community to walk in the 2019 Pride Parade with Sojourn, a wonderful group for queer Jewish youth and adults, and we're going this weekend. Rabbi Rachel, is it too late to sign up for the Pride Parade? Sign up for the Pride Parade, it's really fun. I'm also on the programming committee of Nifty Star Board, which is the youth group in national and regional, and I continue to be involved in Tefty here too. Youth group has always been a big support for me over the years. It has become my safe space, and I have friends from all around the region thanks to SAR. I highly encourage you and your children to check it out too if it's something you're interested in. I couldn't resist the opportunity to plug it. I love Nifty SAR so much. Temple Emanu-El has given me the best community. It means so much to me that I'm able to have this community that accepts me for who I am. Rabbi Spike talked a little bit about this in his sermon, and he also told us about this in confirmation. He told us the story of Hineni, God's call to show ourselves to him. It's not just physical, but it's also deeper. It means stepping forward into the light and saying, Hineni, here I am with all of my strengths and weaknesses, my good traits and my flaws. I am ready for whatever you have planned for me. I think that is the best possible way to summarize my story, both with myself and others, accepting myself for who I am, imperfections and all. By sharing this with all of you, I am inviting you to participate and hear my story, and to hear me declare myself as August Riley Ziffer, and to say to you all, Hineni, here I am. If you guys want to come to the Pride Parade, you can text Rabbi Rachel or me.
We're happy to answer some questions. I think we have a few minutes if anybody has. Oh. You're so right.
You have a question?
No, I just want to say you're a very special person.
Thank you.
And I enjoyed listening to you. And if I can ever be of any help to you, I will give you my name and number.
Thank you, Tom. So lovely. Question?
So how does a sixth grader realize that they're gay or different? What has this something you were living? Were you like playing with trucks and cars and not dolls? What made you feel that you were not a girl?
I don't think there's kind of this misconception that something like often made people gay or made people trans. It's kind of the same thing as just knowing that you're straight, knowing that you liked girls or that you liked boys. It was kind of just always something that I had like been dealing with. Like I liked wearing dresses, but I also liked having my short hair when I got my hair cut. So those things early on in life, I just kind of thought were normal because that's what I had been living with. So I was just like any other kid. I had my Barbies, I had my pink room, but there is always kind of an undercurrent of just, you know, I like feeling like a boy, and so that is something that I started to realize later. It might not just be kind of a normal thing, that it might be a little different.
Question?
I thought I understood a little bit, but I obviously understood very little. The question I have is maybe too personal, but would like to ask it, and if you decline, that's fine. The examples that your mother gave of people who have transitioned involve changing their bodies. From what I understand from what you said, that's not a requirement to be binary. It's not even a factor if you don't want it to be. And I'm kind of curious how you feel that transition from a female to a male affects you from a body standpoint and a perception of what the community thinks, the outside community, not people who understand you, but their reactions.
Right. Being trans absolutely does not require any bodily, changes. I am on testosterone supplements, so I am on hormone replacement therapy. I am about 3 months in, and I plan on getting top surgery when I am older. So that is just my personal preference. And everyone else, other trans people have kind of their definitions of gender affirming their body to be in the gender that they want.
Hi. First off, thanks very much for sharing your journey and your story, and it's a lot to go through, especially with the statistics that you shared earlier, which were quite eye-popping. Honestly, I got lost a little bit on the Holocaust analogy, but I was just trying to think, could you give us individually or as a community suggestions about how we all can be better accepting actions that we could take as a community and as individuals in our daily lives?
Yeah.
Great question. So I'm going to go back to the Holocaust analogy for a second, because the intent of that was to say there were a lot of people during the Holocaust that just stood by and did nothing. And the trans youth and the trans community today requires that we do not stand by and do nothing. So your question is perfect, because the whole goal is be accepting. If there is a child in your life in particular who comes out as gay, trans, non-binary, whatever it might be, don't question them, but understand them. Tell them that you are there to support them. We don't understand everything. Auggie has taught us a ton in the last couple years. We have in turn shared that on social media when he lets us, because we want our friends to know, we want our community to know. If you don't know someone who's trans, it's hard to understand. So asking questions is fine. Ask questions in a non-judgmental way so that you can truly learn and understand what support they need. That's the best thing that you can do for these kids, because there are so many mental health issues and suicides and such. So anyway, yeah.
I'll talk once at least. So don't do what Janet and I did. So many years ago, when Janet talked about, we had someone in our community came out and said they were trans, and Janet used a kind of nice term that we rolled our eyes, but honestly, it was worse. It was like, oh boy, look what they're doing now. So we made this assessment of this person, and so we are guilty of doing exactly what we're asking people not to do. And it's a hard one. And so we all have, when we don't understand something, we immediately go to a place of reacting to something we don't understand. And that reaction and that damage from that reaction could be long-lasting and life-changing and memorable to that child, that niece, that nephew, that grandchild, the brother, the sister. And so words, my wife said this, words matter. And so just be careful with words and listen. And if you're curious, ask questions and do it from a place of respect.
I agree with everything they said. I think the biggest thing is listen to them, because you might not know everything, and there are different people who like to explain different things, but if anyone asks me a question in like a non-judgmental way, I will tell them. So my biggest thing is listen to what they are saying, listen to what they want to be called, and do your research. It's a quick Google online to, say what's the definition of this. And of course, the internet is a rabbit hole, but you just have to be open to learning and be open to saying, okay, I might not get this right now, and I might not know what it is, but I will learn about it more and more, and with that, I will become more knowledgeable and more accepting.
I don't want you to lose it. Thank you all. Auggie, Janet, Andrew, thank you for saying yes when I called. I have often subbed at our religious school, and I was grateful to have Auggie as my madricine. And there were times when I would slip up and say, she, and self-correct to say he or they. And Janet told me that self-correction is one of the biggest compliments we can give to support those in transition, because it says we are trying. I'm learning. I'm doing my best. And I thank you all for being friends that will continue to educate me as a human being and as a Jew and as a member of Temple Emanu-El. I just want to read you a little something that we all said today in our prayer book that really hit me. This was part of the prayer for our congregation. And it said, for all who come here today on this holy day of Yom Kippur to share the search for meaning and renewal, your presence is a blessing. Your friendship is a gift. May the spirit of peace, dignity, and respect live within these walls, inspiring us to care for one another with compassion. I can't think of anything more beautiful to end this. Thank you.